My name is Richard Charlton. I used to be an ordinary office worker, spending my days slacking off and dealing with a difficult boss. My life changed forever when a mysterious system suddenly forced me to transmigrate into another world. Before I could even finish my last thoughts, I was pulled away and dropped into the body of a young noble named Richard Charlton. The man I replaced was a terrible person. As the eldest son of Duke Robert Charlton in the Kingdom of Edengard, the original Richard was a cruel bully. He spent his days in Thorn City tormenting innocent people, stealing from poor street vendors, and hurting animals for his own amusement. Just before I arrived, he had kicked a poor old farmer's vegetable cart into the mud and was about to strike the old man. At that exact moment, a bolt of lightning hit him as a form of divine punishment, allowing my soul to take over his charred body. I woke up in a dark castle room, feeling confused and hungry. My memories merged with the original Richard's, and I realized I was now in a world filled with magic, monsters, and complex politics. While the townspeople celebrated the death of the cruel young master, I had to find a way to survive. I discovered that I have a special lottery system that might help me gain power, but my situation is dangerous. My new father, the Duke, is a cold and powerful warrior. He clearly dislikes the person Richard used to be and doesn't believe in the divine lightning. Because of the scandal and my bad reputation, he decided to exile me to the southern wilds, a dangerous, unsettled frontier. He wants me to leave Thorn City and learn to pioneer new lands, which is basically a death sentence for a spoiled noble. Now, I am stuck in a body everyone hates, facing a brother who wants my inheritance, and being sent to a wasteland. I have to use my modern brain and my new system to stay alive and prove that I am not the monster everyone remembers. After the lightning strike, my charred and broken body was carried back to the castle. At first, my father, Duke Robert, didn't take the news seriously. He was busy with paperwork and expected me to be in some minor trouble again. However, when he learned I had been struck by lightning and was in critical condition, his attitude changed instantly. He rushed to the infirmary and was devastated to see me looking like a piece of charcoal. His grief quickly turned into a violent rage directed at my two attendants, Toby and Bud. He blamed them for failing to protect me and beat them severely. My father even threatened the local bishop, demanding a miracle to save my life. While I lay unconscious, the people of Thorn City reacted very differently. To them, the lightning was a divine punishment that I deserved for being a cruel bully. They celebrated in the streets, cheering that the town's biggest troublemaker was finally gone. When I eventually woke up half a month later, the city's joy turned into pure anger. The commoners felt cheated by the gods and the church for allowing a villain like me to survive. They even attacked a young priest in the streets because they were so frustrated that I was back. I was at the center of all this hatred and chaos. Yet as I lay in my bed, I knew nothing about the storm of fury waiting for me outside. I only knew that my life as a noble in this new world was starting with everyone wishing I was dead. I used to be an ordinary office worker, exhausted by a difficult boss and endless overtime. One night, everything went dark, and I woke up in this cold, stone castle as Richard Charlton, the eldest son of a duke. I am now a soul from the modern world trapped in the body of a notorious scoundrel who was recently struck by lightning. As I lay in bed, I struggled to balance my old memories with my new reality. This world is wild, backward, and dangerous, but it also has magic and mysterious creatures. To my surprise, I discovered a system in my mind, a colorful wheel that looks like a lottery. It gives me a glimmer of hope that I can actually achieve something great here, instead of just being a spoiled noble. My excitement was quickly interrupted by a growling stomach. I called for my maid, Celia, and felt a pang of guilt when I saw her. The original Richard was a cruel man, and she looked terrified of me. However, I learned that she saw a different side of him. Apparently, he used his allowance to help pay for her mother's medicine. She brought me a meal of oatmeal, meat soup, and white bread. While I found the food boring and way too peppery, I realized how lucky I am. Most people in this world live miserable lives of hard labor and hunger, while I get to eat meat and wear fur. After I finished eating, I watched Celia act very strangely. She checked the door to make sure no one was watching, then reached into a hidden her leg. For a second, I thought she was going to kill me, but she pulled out a long, thick cigar. It seems that even in this backward world, I might still find some of the comforts I miss from home. I finally got my hands on a cigar, a small luxury that made this strange, backward world feel a bit more like home. As I relaxed, my maid Celia massaged my legs and shared the local gossip. I learned about mercenaries hunting monsters and, more importantly, that my father, Duke Robert, had just made a fortune selling furs, nearly 900 gold griffins. In this kingdom, that much money has incredible power. A single gold coin is worth about 200 copper coins, which is what an average person earns in an entire year. However, the good mood didn't last. Celia mentioned that my half-brother, Pelop, is returning from the capital. He is a talented student and a threat to my inheritance. Since I am the legitimate heir, his only path to power is through my disappearance. I suspect the divine punishment that nearly killed the original Richard might have been a plot. Just as I was trying to access my new system lottery to prepare for this threat, my father entered the room. Duke Robert is a legendary warrior who has killed nearly 1,000 enemies. His presence is terrifying, and I struggled to hide that I am an imposter. He didn't come to comfort me. Instead, he delivered a harsh judgment. To protect the family's reputation from the curse of my lightning strike, he is exiling me to the Southern Wilds. The Southern Wilds is a dangerous frontier full of rival tribes. While my father calls it pioneering, it feels like a death sentence. It's clear he has given up on me in favor of Pelop. I felt a wave of despair, realizing I have to face a wasteland without ever enjoying the luxury of being a duke's son. Still, I realized that staying too long near my father's sharp instincts might lead him to discover the truth about my soul. I accepted the exile to survive. My father left the room with a heavy silence, leaving me to face a future where I must use my modern wits and my mysterious system to stay alive. The heavy footsteps slowly faded away, disappearing at the end of the corridor. Duke Robert hadn't gone far. He stopped at the corner between the second and third floors. The torchlight flickered, casting shifting shadows across his face. At that moment, the iron-blooded lord, who had once stood firm against hundreds of barbarian riders in the northern lands, looked torn and troubled. He had always been known for his decisiveness. Wherever his sword pointed, he never hesitated. Yet when it came to dealing with his eldest son Richard, whom he saw as useless, he found himself indecisive, even feeling angry and ashamed of his own hesitation. Would the ancient banner of the Charlton family and the tens of thousands of people struggling in poverty really be handed over to that reckless, spoiled young man who had once been struck by lightning and feared the strong while bullying the weak? He could almost see the castle collapsing in Richard's hands and the people crying out in despair. At that moment, Duke Robert was like an old lion trapped in a cage, full of strength, yet powerless no matter how hard he struggled. Then, a beautiful yet sorrowful face suddenly appeared in his mind. It was Eleanor, the woman who was almost openly his companion. She held a clever little boy in her arms. The boy had eyes that looked just like hers when she was young, full of energy and ambition. Yes, he still had another choice, to make his illegitimate son, Pelop, the heir. But that would mean openly breaking noble traditions and starting a storm of conflict that could sweep through Thorn City and the entire southern province. Just as he was caught between choices, the air in the shadow of the staircase seemed to twist slightly. A thin figure quietly appeared out of nowhere. The sudden change made Duke Robert instantly alert. His muscles tensed, and the sharp aura around him almost burst forth. But when he saw the face in the shadows, dry and wrinkled like old orange peel, his tension eased, and the fierce energy faded away. In its place came a tired, surprised smile. "Lord Harold?" Duke Robert's voice carried the relief of seeing an old friend. "Weren't you in the capital? When did you return?" The man called Harold was over 60, with graying hair and sunken cheeks. His narrow, triangular eyes were sharp and unsettling, and his large hooked nose nearly touched his thin, colorless lips. At the question, Harold bowed slightly, his movements smooth and natural. "I just returned, my lord," he said in a low, slightly rough voice, as if deliberately disguised. Duke Robert nodded quickly, his tone urgent. "How is His Majesty's health?" As he spoke, his straight back leaned forward a little, his eyes full of hope. Hearing such a direct question, Harold's cloudy eyes shifted slightly, as if choosing his words carefully. After a moment, he sighed softly. Alas, the situation is not good. His voice dropped lower, heavy with concern. The royal physicians and the temple priests have privately said that His Majesty may not live to see next spring. A brief look of regret crossed his face, but it vanished almost at once. Not live to see next spring? Duke Robert repeated the words without thinking, each one striking his mind like a cold nail. His expression grew complicated. Shock, sorrow, and remembrance all flickered across his strong features. The torches on the wall crackled softly. He suddenly came back to his senses, his throat moving as he swallowed. His Majesty was a truly capable king. Duke Robert's voice grew quieter, carrying a distant tone of remembrance. Diligent and wise, he pulled the kingdom back from the edge of chaos. His dry lips trembled slightly. His gaze seemed to pierce through the stone walls, reaching toward the distant royal capital and the blood-stained fortress in the northern lands. Back then, at the northern stronghold, the wind and snow were even harsher than today. The golden wolf banners of the tribes stood below the walls. My few hundred wounded soldiers and I had run out of arrows. Our blades were dull, yet we held the last tower to the end. We watched the smoke fade in the storm, almost able to smell the iron scent of battle in the air. His voice shook slightly, his eyes reddened, and his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His Majesty led the reinforcements himself, arriving like a miracle through the storm. His tone softened, carrying a rare warmth. He taught me how to command troops, drawing formations with branches by the campfire. He taught me how to govern, saying that a ruler should be like a rock, steady and unshaken under weight. Harold stood quietly in the shadows beyond the firelight, head lowered, his face calm and focused. Duke Robert's voice faded like the tide, sinking into the gentle memory of that long-ago winter night by the fire. Soon, harsh reality pulled him back from his brief dream. His eyes refocused, slightly dazed, and fell on Harold. "My apologies, Mr. Harold." He raised a weary hand to his brow. "I lost my composure for a moment." His short words carried a weakness he deeply despised. Harold slowly lifted his eyelids. Shadows gathered in his sunken eyes. When he fully opened them, there was no impatience or sympathy, only a calm, almost empty stillness. His thin hand moved slightly, firmly but politely stopping the Duke's apology. "There's nothing to apologize for, my lord." Harold's lips curved faintly, almost in self-mockery. "Loyalty and remembrance are a knight's most precious virtues. When I heard the news, I lost control far more than you did. Only, no one was there to see it." Listening to his old friend's comfort, Duke Robert shook his head with a bitter smile and let out a deep sigh. That sigh seemed to drain the last bit of strength from his chest. After a long silence, a low, dreamlike voice broke the stillness. "Has His Majesty already chosen an heir?" As he asked, every muscle in Duke Robert's body tensed, and his fists clenched unconsciously. He no longer looked like a guardian of the border, but like a prisoner waiting for the blade to fall. In the shadows, a faint, sharp light flashed in Harold's narrow eyes. After a few seconds of silence, his deep voice sounded again. "His Majesty did think carefully about the matter of succession while lying ill." He slowed his speech, as if choosing his words with care. "But you know well that those so-called princes, Leon, lost in pleasure, Igo, weak and timid, and Karsten, ambitious but without foundation, none of them are fit to wear the crown." Then his tone subtly changed. "So His Majesty finally decided to follow the ancient and unshakable laws of the nobility." The calm reassurance in Harold's voice vanished, leaving only the cold weight of truth. His gaze passed over Duke Robert's trembling shoulders and turned toward Richard's room down the corridor. A faint, meaningful smile appeared on his face. His Majesty's choice was entirely expected. He adjusted his stance slightly, his eyes returning to Robert's stiff figure. "Just like your wise and steadfast father, Lord Fedor." He emphasized the name, each syllable striking against long-buried memories. "Back then, when Thorn City faced its own choice, he chose you as the only rightful heir to this land, rather than young Master William, who was graceful and admired by many in the capital." The mention of that name left Duke Robert completely silent. A few days later, The lead gray clouds still hung low over Thorn City. The cold wind lashed against the stone walls, whistling sharply. The whole city seemed like a giant bear curled up on the wasteland, silent and heavy, waiting for spring to awaken it. Lately, a rare feeling of ease had quietly begun to spread through the city that had been under pressure for so long. The reason was simple. The feared and disliked young master, Richard Charlton, hadn't been seen for many days. On the streets, people whispered to each other in low voices. "Did you hear? Young Master Richard hasn't caused trouble at the tavern for days. Even old John, the owner, looks much healthier now. There's a new dance hall on West Street, and they say the dancers are beautiful. It's so lively there, yet he hasn't shown up. That's really something unusual. Could it be that lightning really struck him dead that day? Shoo, don't say such things. You'll bring trouble on yourself." Rumors spread like wild grass. Before long, a more reliable story came from the servants working in the castle's lower levels, and it quickly became the accepted truth. Young Master Richard had been so frightened by the divine lightning that he now hid all day in the darkest room of the castle, wrapped in blankets and trembling, afraid that the heavens might strike him again. When the news spread, the long-suppressed townspeople almost wanted to set off fireworks in celebration. The gods have finally opened their eyes. So even that troublemaker has something to fear. Please, heavens, let him never come out again. Because of this, the city's church became lively once more, with people rushing to buy forgiveness tokens from the clergy. The clinking of coins falling into the wooden box became the most pleasant sound to accompany the priest's prayers. So, what was Richard, the man everyone prayed would stay indoors, doing at that moment? Deep inside the castle, in a room so damp and cold that even the fireplace couldn't warm it, Richard sat cross-legged on his bed. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and bloodshot from lack of sleep. Ever since he had learned from Duke Robert that he was to be exiled, he hadn't slept well for several nights. All his attention was fixed on a colorful system panel that only he could see. This useless system doesn't even have a beginner's guide. Is it making fun of me? He muttered helplessly. After much trial and error, he had finally figured out how it worked. The system's core was a large spinning wheel, and each spin cost 100 points. The only known way to earn points was by exchanging them for money from this world. The exchange rate made his heart sink halfway. 1 copper coin equals 1 point. This is outrageous. Even worse than those greedy pay-to-win games. He almost started cursing on the spot. Fortunately, the system still had a bit of mercy. It gave him 100 starting points for free. Those 100 points were like a carrot dangling in front of a donkey, making him itch with temptation. After struggling for several days, his gambler's mindset finally took over. Maybe, just one try? What if he got something good? With that thought, Richard focused his mind and pressed the start button on the virtual interface. The moment he pressed it, the system's wheel spun rapidly, accompanied by faint background music, and finally stopped on the largest white section. Congratulations. You have drawn Tenant Farmer card. Tenant Farmer card? What's that? Richard raised an eyebrow and looked at the description. Unit type, Tenant Farmer. Poor farmer conscripted to work. Equipment, none. May come with a worn or dull axe. Traits, skilled at farming, logging, and mining. Efficiency depends on mood, food supply, and supervision. Not demanding, but may slack off or run away if treated poorly. Special note. Recruitment requires at least 1 piece of land under your control. Reading this, Richard froze. Tenant farmers? Land. Those words together sparked a strange thought. Could this system be about farming, building armies, and conquering territories instead of personal hero adventures? The idea made him perk up. But when his eyes returned to the card showing a thin, weary farmer, his brief excitement faded again. Rely on these frail farmers to conquer the world? What a joke. Might as well give up now. Reality pulled him back into his cell. The lottery needed points, and points needed coins. But where could he get coins? If he already had coins, would he even need this lottery? If he just shouted for help and offered a full meal a day, plenty of farmers like that would come running to work. Richard had just escaped one trap in the system, only to fall into another seemingly unsolvable problem. Although he still held the title of young master and lived comfortably in the castle, his monthly allowance was strictly limited to just 10 gold coins. This was a rule set by his Duke father, who called it raising a son with modest means. but in truth, it was simply to stop the original heir from wasting money. Once he was truly exiled, even those 10 coins would likely disappear. Outside, the cold wind howled. Inside, Richard paced back and forth in frustration. Calm down. You're a traveler from another world. There must be a way out of this. His bare feet touched the icy floor, and the biting chill cleared his mind. He suddenly stopped and looked out the window. His gaze seemed to travel across mountains and rivers, reaching the distant southern frontier, a poor and chaotic land. That was the place his father, Duke Robert, had chosen for his exile. Chaos, desolation, lawlessness, fierce people. These words together lit a fire in Richard's heart once more. His so-called father, eager to get rid of this family disgrace and raise his illegitimate son instead, would probably be happy to pay a generous travel fee to send him far away. Away from watchful eyes, away from threats. He could finally breathe and grow stronger in the southern borderlands. As long as he had some starting funds to activate his system, he would have a real chance to turn things around. It was far better than being trapped in this luxurious cage. The thought grew wild in his mind, rekindling his determination. But the key was how to make his father willingly hand over a large sum of money. One look at this worn-down castle was enough to know that Duke Robert was no generous man. To make him pay, especially a large amount that seemed like a waste, Richard needed a reason the Duke couldn't refuse, perhaps even a carefully crafted bait. For example, he could use the rumor that he had been frightened by lightning, pretending to be a timid fool who only wanted to hide somewhere quiet. That way, his father might see the money as a hush payment to protect the family's reputation. Thinking of this, Richard's breathing quickened. In his mind, he could already hear the clinking of gold coins, the sound of freedom and a new beginning. It seems it's time to have a good talk with my dear father. Muttering softly to himself, he picked up the half-burned cheap cigar by the bed, lit it again with a flint, and took 2 deep puffs. The harsh smoke made him cough hard, but it also helped calm his nerves and the uneasy respect he felt toward his strict father. The negotiation that was about to begin would be his first real step into this world, and the most important one. Richard was still thinking about how to get a bit more money out of his father when a sudden knock came from the heavy oak door of his bedroom. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was clear and steady, carrying the strict rhythm of a soldier. The noise made Richard's heart tighten. A strong sense of unease rushed over him. He took a deep breath, forced himself to stay calm, and said in a deliberately steady voice, "Come in." The door opened, and a guard wearing the Charlatan family crest stepped inside. "Young Master Richard," the guard said, standing straight, his voice flat and formal. "The Duke requests your presence in the study immediately." As he spoke, his eyes quickly swept over Richard's tired face, marked with faint burn scars, before lowering to stare at his polished boots. But beneath his lowered gaze, a trace of hidden disdain and quiet amusement still slipped through. "Understood," Richard replied hoarsely. He grabbed the dark brown coat hanging on the chair, threw it over his shoulders, and followed the tall, tower-like guard out of the room. The castle corridor was long and cold, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. Before long, they reached the door of the study. Looking at the heavy wooden door carved with the Charlatan family emblem, Richard felt as if he were facing a great beast slowly opening its jaws toward him. The guard stepped forward and knocked lightly, the rhythm as precise as before. "Come in." The voice of Duke Robert came from inside. The guard opened the door and stepped aside, signaling for Richard to enter. Richard took a deep breath. A mix of old parchment, cigar smoke, and leather polish filled the air. The fireplace burned brightly, yet the chill in the room still lingered. Duke Robert was standing with his back to him, facing the large arched glass window, gazing at the gray, lifeless fields outside. The old butler, Harold, stood silently beside the desk like a shadow. The moment Richard entered, Harold's sharp, triangular eyes fixed on him. "Father." Richard walked to the center of the room in silence, bowed slightly, and performed a proper noble salute. Hearing his voice, Duke Robert slowly turned around. His face showed no emotion, only weariness and distance in his eyes. His sharp gaze lingered on Richard's face for a few seconds, as if trying to find something there, but in the end, he saw only calm acceptance. That complete surrender extinguished the last trace of fatherly feeling in the Duke's eyes. "Now," He was only a lord dealing with a problem. No preamble, straight to the point. Richard. Duke Robert's voice was low. You're staying in Thorn City harms both you and our family's reputation. That divine punishment has already shaken the people's respect for authority, and such doubt is more dangerous than any weapon. Hearing those blunt words, Richard's face remained calm, but his heart sank. Even though he had prepared himself for exile, he hadn't expected it to come so suddenly. This place, at the southernmost edge of the southern province. Duke Robert moved behind the desk, his finger tracing the large map on the wall until it stopped at an area marked with swamps, forests, and lakes. Near the rotten marsh lies a piece of land that officially belongs to the kingdom but has long been abandoned. There's a collapsing watchtower, a flooded old copper mine, and a small river port. He turned to Richard, his eyes cold. From today on, that will be your territory. I will request His Majesty to grant you the title of Baron. Take your people and leave Thorn City. Without my order, you are not to return. There was no warmth in the Duke's tone, only the iron will of a ruler. This expected, yet sudden exile caught Richard off guard. But then, a surge of excitement quickly rose within him. A copper mine? A port? What did that mean? It meant wealth and opportunity. At that thought, Richard almost jumped up in excitement to shout long live. But he managed to hold it back at the last moment. He quickly lowered his head, afraid the other man might notice something unusual. But to Duke Robert, this looked like fear and despair after hearing about his exile. In that instant, a feint appeared in the wall of ice that had long sealed his fatherly feelings. He cleared his throat, his tone softening slightly, though still carrying a hint of condescension. As compensation and as funds for your expedition, I'll give you 500 gold griffins. I'll also assign you a 10-man guard unit. The captain will be Old Keller, a veteran who fought beside me for years. He's reliable enough. 500 gold coins. A 10-man guard. Richard's heart began to race uncontrollably. He quickly did the math. In the southern lands, arming 10 guards would cost at least 200 gold coins. So his actual expedition funds would be 700 gold coins? No, that's too little. He needed more. The old butler, Harold, spoke up at just the right moment, his voice rough and unpleasant. The other attendants will include your 2 former servants, Toby and Bud, Aunt Martha from the laundry, Amy from the kitchen, and their families. And your personal maid, Celia. He paused deliberately, as if to emphasize something. This list included everyone in the castle who had been close to the young master, yet none of them were truly important. It was a complete purge. Richard listened quietly, then slowly lifted his head after a long silence. His face was pale, and his lips trembled slightly. Father, the southern wilderness is barren. Taking so many people there would only make them suffer with me. Please, let them stay here in Thorn City. His voice was hoarse, with a faint tremor. I'll only take Toby, Bud, Celia, and their families. We'll rely on each other. As for the others, could you perhaps exchange their costs for gold coins instead? It would make my journey a bit easier. Though he said this with emotion, in truth he was thinking, what use were cooks and laundry maids on the frontier? They'd only slow him down. This sudden request for simplification made Duke Robert pause. Then, a cold thought exploded in his mind. This boy is planning to run away. He wanted to get rid of all burdens, taking only his companion and loyal follower, carrying his money to some lively place to enjoy life freely. At that thought, Duke Robert felt a surge of deep contempt mixed with a sense of complete relief. A hopeless case. Fine. The farther he goes, the better. All right, I'll give you 500 more gold griffins. My soldiers are worth that much. Duke Robert's voice turned cold again, filled with sarcasm. Spend it wisely. This should be enough for you to live a few peaceful years. After speaking, he waved his hand tiredly and turned back to the window, leaving Richard only a firm, unyielding back. Good grief. I only said I didn't need the supply team. This old man even cut off my guards? Richard shouted in his heart, but dared not say it aloud. He could only swallow his frustration. Thank you, Father. Please, take care. His voice was as soft as a breeze. After those last words, he lowered his head and walked out of the study step by step, his movements heavy. But the moment the door closed, Richard's slightly bent back suddenly straightened. The mask of despair on his face shattered, replaced by a deep, suppressed joy. The guard at the door saw his expression and thought he had lost his mind from stress, quickly stepping aside, afraid to get involved. Inside the study, Richard's departure did not ease the heavy atmosphere. Instead, it grew even heavier. Duke Robert stood before the tall, arched window. The orange glow from the fireplace lit his face, outlining the weariness and disappointment in his features. At that moment, a mix of emotions surrounded him: relief from a lifted burden, sorrow over his son's failures, and a trace of regret he forced himself to suppress. "Mr. Harold." Duke Robert's deep voice broke the silence, though his eyes remained fixed on the desolate fields outside. "Do you think he still has any hope?" His question came weakly, filled with the bitterness of a man worn down by reality, yet carrying a faint, fragile trace of hope. He was asking Harold, but it sounded more like he was questioning his own heart. The old butler stepped forward quietly. His wrinkled face showed no emotion, but his sharp, triangular eyes shone with a stubborn light. He bowed slightly and spoke firmly. "Yes, Your Grace." Hearing this, Duke Robert turned sharply, his gaze like lightning. "Are you sure?" His voice rose suddenly, echoing sharply in the spacious study. "Harold, have you lost your mind?" The Duke's voice trembled with anger, his eyes filled with fury. "Can't you see it? He just wants to take the money and run away to some lively place where he can waste it all until it's gone, or worse. Is that what you call hope?" His suppressed roar swept through the study like a storm, as if releasing years of disappointment and frustration. Yet Harold's expression did not change in the face of this outburst. He waited quietly until the Duke calmed down a little, then shook his head slightly. "Your Grace, please don't let anger and prejudice cloud your wise mind and sharp eyes." Harold's voice remained steady. "What you saw just now may have been despair, pleading, or greed in young Master Richard's eyes when faced with his fate. But to me, those things seemed only on the surface." He paused, then lifted his head to meet the Duke's still-burning gaze. "In truth, I saw something else in his eyes, a kind of ambition and unwillingness hidden beneath the despair." "Ambition? Unwillingness?" Duke Robert gave a cold laugh, full of disdain. "Harold, you really are getting old. A useless man who only thinks of running away and chasing pleasure. Perhaps he's unwilling, yes, but what ambition could he possibly have?" Harold was unmoved by the Duke's mockery. Lowering his eyes slightly, he spoke calmly, as if telling an old story. "My lord, the truth often hides beneath appearances. When you announced that young Master Richard would be sent to that wild land, for a moment, his eyes were not filled only with despair. That look was more like a trapped beast seeing the open plain, or a chess player spotting the only move left in a desperate game." Harold's voice grew softer, but every word was clear. "He doesn't want guards, but he insists on taking Toby, Bard, Celia, and their families. To me, it feels like he's choosing pieces for a dangerous game, selecting the few he can truly trust. Toby and Bard are probably the only ones in the castle who still care about young Master Richard, and they're both quite capable. As for Celia, I've noticed her before. She's unusually strong and clever. The people he's taking are not a burden." Hearing this, the anger and mockery on Duke Robert's face slowly faded. The words dropped into his heart like a small stone, stirring quiet ripples that made him recall his son's expression just moments ago. Was there really only despair in those eyes? Duke Robert fell into deep thought. The study grew even quieter. After a long silence, the Duke let out a heavy sigh, his voice carrying a faint tremor. "Even if there's the slightest chance you're right, we both know what kind of place the Southern Wastes are. A spoiled young man who's spent his life in comfort, taking 2 guards, a young woman, and a group of old and weak family members, along with 1,000 gold griffins. I almost hope he finds some busy town to settle in quietly. That way, he might at least stay alive." At those words, a subtle, knowing look appeared on Harold's calm face, as if he had seen through something. "That's exactly why it's worth taking a gamble, isn't it?" "A gamble?" Duke Robert narrowed his eyes, studying Harold carefully. "Yes, a wager, one that concerns the future of the Charlton family." A rare smile appeared on Harold's face. His tone was calm, but his words carried great weight. "The stakes are the future heir of Thorn Castle, and my loyalty, as old as it may be." Duke Robert's pupils contracted sharply. He repeated the words slowly. "Are you certain?" Harold didn't care about the Duke's shock. He nodded with quiet confidence. I'm certain, if young Master Richard can survive in that chaotic land for 5 years, and even build something of his own, showing the courage and ability of a true lord, then please acknowledge him as the rightful heir of the Charlton family. This condition hit Duke Robert like a heavy punch. Allowing a banished failure to become the heir again? That's simply ridiculous. Before he could speak to object, Harold spoke again, his voice suddenly calm and resigned, as if accepting his fate. If in the end you win, Lord Richard truly becomes useless or disappears without a trace, just as you wish, then I will loyally serve Lord Pelop Shalaton with all I have, my skills, connections, and my last strength as an old man, to help him secure the position of Lord of Thorn City. I will be his sharpest sword and strongest shield, helping him keep the Shalaton family's legacy and erase any trace of Lord Richard's existence. As he finished, the study fell into complete silence. All that remained was the crackling of firewood in the fireplace and the howling wind outside, like ghostly screams. At this moment, Duke Robert's heart was in turmoil. Harold was his most trusted supporter, more valuable than 1,000 soldiers in heavy armor. This old but powerful steward, who knew the family's secrets and had countless connections, was risking everything for his unworthy eldest son, loyal to him, as if his life depended on it. Duke Robert's deep gaze swept over Harold's face, seeing in nearly obsessive confidence. An uncontrollable thought arose. I, Robert Shalaton, ruler of the Southern Kingdom, pride myself on my sharp judgment. Could I have been wrong about my eldest son? Is that unlucky boy really just pretending to be weak to hide his strength? Time slowly passed in suffocating silence. Finally, Duke Robert slowly raised his hand, rubbed his aching temple, and uttered one word. Fine. This word, in the tense study, felt like signing a contract that would determine the fate of the Shalaton family for 100 years. But inside, he was thinking, well, this isn't a bad deal. If I win, let Pelop take the throne. If I lose, then let that little brat come back and inherit the family. Wait, why does something feel off? Celia had obviously just been here. New firewood was added to the fireplace, but the faint flames couldn't chase away the pervasive cold. He hurriedly took off his cold wind-dampened coat and quickly slipped into bed. Before he could catch his breath, Duke Robert sent someone to bring 1,000 gold coins. Watching the servant's quick movements, it seemed he was eager to get rid of this bad luck charm. After the servant left, Richard tightly wrapped himself in the quilt, carefully picked up a coin, and examined it repeatedly. The craftsmanship was rough, like a flattened bottle cap, with the emblem of a griffin representing the Aidingard royal family carved on the front. Perhaps because it was very old, the design was blurry. At first glance, it looked more like a flapping quail. Holding the coin, Richard felt a sense of relief and sank heavily back into bed. He took a deep breath, focused, and summoned his simple Wheel of Fortune system. The screen was still gaudy, with a large wheel divided into many colorful sections and a points 0 display in the bottom right corner. Wow, I have money now. Richard's excitement was almost uncontrollable. Thinking of the thrill of winning rare items in games before, his heart started pounding faster. Fortunately, he was not impulsive. His past experience with lotteries told him not to spend all his money at once, or he might lose everything. He decided to try spending 100 coins first. Thinking this, Richard gave the command. System, exchange 100 coins for points. Ding. 100 coins spent. Points gained, 19,478. Current points, 19,478. Clearly, these coins were not pure gold. Looking at his rapidly shrinking purse, Richard winced. 100 coins could support a normal family of 3 for decades of comfortable living. But seeing the 6-figure points total, his pain was quickly replaced by excitement. He issued another command. System, 10 draws in a row. Warning, the system only supports single draws, each costing 100 points. Wow. Hearing the warning, Richard almost choked. Money has already been added, but getting it back from the system is as unlikely as asking a dishonest game developer for a refund. He forced himself to hold back curses, clenched his teeth, and used his mind to press the lottery button hard. The wheel slowly spun, the colorful squares blurred together, and he couldn't tell where the pointer would stop. Richard held his breath, so nervous that he forgot about his injuries. The wheel spun for about 2 seconds, then the shaky pointer stopped on a white square. Congratulations, you drew. Tenant farmer card. Another tenant farmer card? Fortunately, labor still has some use. Richard comforted himself. One more time. Congratulations, you drew. Tenant farmer card. 5 times in a row, all were tenant farmer cards. 5 guaranteed white cards? Am I just that unlucky? Richard shook his head helplessly and activated his emotional regulation mode as a traveler. Forget it. Just see it as saving people for future expansion. Keep drawing. With that, the wheel spun again and finally stopped on a green sector. Congratulations, you drew. Beginner strength potion. A green light flashed, and a small bottle icon appeared in his inventory. It's a hit. Richard's heart raced as he quickly clicked the icon. Beginner strength potion. Slightly increases the drinker's strength. Effect, permanent. Cooldown, 48 hours. Strength potion? Just the name tells him what it does. Without hesitation, he clicked the use button below the icon. The potion instantly disappeared. He waited a moment, but felt nothing. His body seemed to undergo some subtle change, but it also felt like nothing had changed. It seems he needs to take a few more bottles to see a clear effect. Richard thought so. Keep drawing. The wheel spun again and finally stopped on a gray sector. Congratulations, you drew. Luck 1. The system notification sounded, and a nearly invisible light spot merged into the wheel. A small number, 1, appeared in the top right corner of the screen. Luck? What's it good for? Richard's mouth was slightly open, showing surprise and confusion. Although he didn't understand the situation, he believed that existence is justified. Keep drawing. Luck points 1. Next, there were dozens of consecutive luck point reports, almost causing Richard to break down mentally. Are you messing with me? Were the rewards just bait earlier? Is this the real chance to win now? He shook his head hard, pushing the terrible thought aside, and clenched his teeth as he said, Keep drawing. The wheel spun. Congratulations. You have won. Basic agility potion. A small light green bottle appeared in his inventory. Richard instinctively clicked to open it. Basic agility potion. Slightly increases the user's agility. Effect, permanent. Cooldown, 48 hours. Another strength-enhancing potion? Richard, who was feeling down, suddenly became excited and chose to use it immediately. Like before, he felt nothing special. He was too lazy to think deeply, just wanting to finish using his points quickly. Keep drawing. Luck points 1. Congratulations. You have won. Basic wisdom potion. Another light blue liquid icon appeared in his inventory. Richard clicked to check. Basic wisdom potion. Slightly increases the user's thinking speed and memory. Effect, permanent. Cooldown, 48 hours. Wisdom potion. Boost intelligence. Richard's heart started pounding faster. After the soul fusion caused memory confusion, this potion came just in time. He immediately chose to use it, but still felt nothing. He still had many points left, so he kept drawing. Luck points 1. Again and again, luck points seemed to become the main theme of the draws. By the 80th time, Richard was completely numb. Outside the window, it was already dark, and the moonlight lazily spread across the bedroom floor. He still clenched his teeth, constantly trying to reassure himself. The next draw will definitely be something good. Luck points 1. When he reached the 101st draw, the pointer suddenly stopped on the green section. Congratulations. You have won. Basic life recovery potion. A faint green glow lit up, and a new icon appeared in his inventory. Basic life recovery potion. Accelerates wound healing. No cooldown. Recovery potion? Richard's eyes widened instantly. Exhaustion and joy intertwined on his face. This is a life-saving medicine. He chose to use it without hesitation. This time, he finally felt something. A faint coolness spread through his body, like rain nourishing dry land. The area around his wound tingled intensely, as if his skin was rapidly growing. After about 10 seconds, the itching and tingling faded away. Richard carefully felt his body. The burning pain from being struck by lightning had much lessened. It worked. It really worked. For Richard now, the value of this potion was more important than all his previous gains combined. At this moment, his luck points had reached 92. Keep going. Congratulations. You have received Basic Life Recovery Potion. Congratulations. You have received farmer card. Seeing the cards and potions keep increasing in his inventory, Richard's eyes grew brighter. He thought to himself, am I starting to get lucky? But it turned out he was too happy too soon. In the next 8 draws, the lucky point notification sounded again, cold and relentless. It wasn't until his luck points reached 100 that things suddenly changed. Ding! Lucky points are full, 100. Special reward system activated. Congratulations. You received farmer card 10. Wow. Is there a hidden reward? Richard shivered, almost jumping out of bed. The previous numbness was instantly replaced by joy. See, existence itself is justified. Now, he was even more eager to draw. His points quickly decreased. 4,478, 3,478, 1,478. Looking at the remaining 1,478 points, Richard began to tally his gains. After subtracting the used potions and the 100 lucky points, the final results were 17 farmer cards, 1 strength potion, 1 agility potion, 1 wisdom potion, and 63 lucky points. Overall, the gains were quite good. Last 14 times. I don't believe I can't get something good. He licked his lips and gritted his teeth. Let's draw. Lucky points 1. Until the final draw, the wheel spun unusually slowly. Richard instinctively held his breath, watching the pointer slowly stop. Congratulations. You received lucky points 1, current lucky points 77, current points 78. Wow. Richard couldn't help but curse loudly, then shook his head at himself in a self-deprecating way. What am I really hoping for? That this unlucky system will finally produce an SSR. Time flows like water, and years pass quickly. The days of pretending to be impressive are gone in the blink of an eye. In the cold winter, tiny snowflakes fall from the sky, soon turning into continuous, heavy snow that covers everything day and night. Overnight, the castle, streets, and bare branches of Thorn City are all blanketed in white snow. But amid the cold wind, a piece of good news that makes most people forget the cold quietly spreads through the city. Young Master Richard Charlton, the guy who deserves 1,000 cuts, is about to be exiled to the most remote southern province, next to the rotten swamp. This news was not leaked by accident, but was carefully arranged by some, well-meaning, people. Everyone secretly believes that this is the Duke's way of paving the way for Pelop, the illegitimate child returning from the royal capital. In the Old Oak Tavern, the atmosphere is lively and relaxed. Did you hear? That troublemaker is finally being sent away by the Duke. A mercenary with a full beard raises his glass loudly, full of joy. Cheers to this good news. Cheers, the tavern responds in unison. Putting down his glass, a merchant next to him wipes the wine from his beard and smugly adds, in the southern wilderness, even vultures refuse to settle. Sending him there is perfect. In a corner, a tall, thin man with glasses pushes up his frames and sharply adds, now Thorn City can finally be peaceful. Pelop is young and talented, 100 times better than that troublemaker. Our good days are coming. A drunken man with a red face raises his glass again and shouts, for a new beginning in Thorn City, cheers. Cheers. The cheers echo from the tavern, as if celebrating some great event. Not far away, in the blacksmith shop, the hammering sounds are especially loud. A young apprentice, face glowing, pulls the bellows while joking with the master blacksmith. Our good days are coming soon. No more reckless troublemakers or bullies, and no one will come here to cause trouble. The master heard this and slammed his hammer down hard, sparks flying from the anvil. He cursed loudly. It's finally gone. He should have left long ago, so he doesn't cause trouble and drag us into it. In the market, vendors exchanged glances and whispered quietly, their voices never stopping. That troublemaker is finally leaving. Thank the gods. I think my prayers worked recently. I should go to the church later and buy some forgiveness tokens. Hopefully, he never comes back. It's best if he just stays away forever. Last time, he rode his horse over my vegetable stall. I knew he would be punished by the gods. Looks like they finally listened. A woman selling vegetables cursed fiercely. Soon, the old stories about Lord Richard's wild behavior and divine punishment were brought up again. This time, the talk seemed a little more relieved, as if people were glad to see him go. But people's feelings are not the same. Outside the castle, in the servant quarters, things looked very different, much more sad. Toby and Baird, along with their families, were deep in despair. In a small, simple house, Toby's wife sat on the ground, hugging her young son tightly, crying loudly. "I won't go. I'd rather die." Her voice was hoarse and full of hopelessness. "What is that place in the South Wilderness? Foreign tribes, poisonous insects, miasma, and wild animals everywhere. We'd be sent to die if we go." Toby looked pale as he leaned against the wall, annoyed by his wife's desperate crying. He grabbed his hair and shouted, "Stop crying. What's the point? Do you think we have a choice? This is exile. We're just curse bugs now. Who cares if we live or die?" As he shouted, his eyes turned red too. He had endured over 10 years in Thorn City, finally working his way up from a Duke's coachman to a personal servant to the young master. He had a decent job and a stable life, thinking he could rise further. But suddenly, everything was gone, like a roller coaster ride, exciting but terrifying. Meanwhile, Baird's family was also very gloomy. Baird, short and stocky, sat silently on the doorstep, staring at the ground as if he could find some answer there. His old mother sat quietly on a bamboo chair in the yard, tears silently falling as she muttered hoarsely, "This is truly a tragedy. I am an old man, and I have to go to such a place to suffer. If I had known it would be like this, I wouldn't have let you leave the army. Otherwise, I might have been a captain by now." Bard's wife, with tears in her eyes, quietly packs their few belongings. Her movements are slow, as if preparing for a funeral. Their son, Alan, just turned 12 and is at an age of understanding. Seeing the despair on his family's faces, he clenches his fists instinctively and says firmly, "Don't be afraid. I am grown up now. I will protect you from now on." Hearing this, Bard finally comes back to himself. He looks at his son, moves his lips as if to speak, but only lets out a heavy sigh, thinking to himself, "Son, the place we are going might not be something we can solve with just fists." The cries and despair of the family sharply contrast with the joyful atmosphere in the city. At the edge of the slum, in a small, low hut, the atmosphere is also heavy, but a faint different emotion flows through. This is Celia's home. Celia's father, old Cato, is curled up in the corner, with his back to the broken door, smoking a dry pipe. Years of hard labor have bent his back. When he hears the news that the whole family will be exiled with young Master Richard, he doesn't even lift his eyelids. His mother, Martha, is struggling to mend a worn-out piece of clothing in the faint light coming through in the wall. When she hears the news, she stops her work, wipes her eyes with her apron, and lets out a tired sigh. "Oh, the southern wilderness? I heard it's sparsely populated, full of poisonous insects, fierce beasts, and plagues." She pauses, and her bitter voice carries a faint glimmer of hope. "But what can we do staying here? We're just starving and freezing every day and always watching our faces." This time, the young master wants to take Celia with him. Is he still thinking about our girl? If the young master can establish himself there in the future, maybe Celia will have a chance. She doesn't dare to say more, but words like concubine, lover, or even noble lady seem to drift in the air with the cold. Old Cato's cracked lips move slightly, finally only producing a muffled as if he silently agrees with his wife's faint hope. After all, even a faint hope is better than the dark, sunless reality before them. Deep inside the hut, in a humble bedroom, Celia sits quietly on a small bed. She kept her head slightly lowered, her long dark brown hair covering most of her face, revealing only her tightly clenched lips and sharp chin. The low voices of her parents in the yard drifted to her ears with the breeze. She instinctively clenched the hem of her faded dress. After a moment, she slowly loosened her grip, stood up, and walked to the old wooden cabinet with its door ajar in the corner. Inside, there were only a few neatly folded old clothes. She reached in and took out each piece, unfolding them carefully, smoothing out every crease, then folding them back with great care. Her movements were very steady, as if she were tidying not her old clothes, but her uncertain future. Time passed day by day, and the weather grew colder. In Thorn City, homeless people all gathered outside the sturdy wooden door of the old oak tavern, huddling close to the doorframe, desperately trying to absorb the faint warmth leaking through the warm air, mixed with beer, sweat, and cheap smoke, seemed to be their last hope to survive the winter. Passers-by, whether merchants or mercenaries, saw the crowd at the tavern's entrance from afar and hurriedly avoided it with disgust. A wealthy lady dressed in a thick fox fur coat and elegant clothes hurried past, covering her nose and mouth with a silk handkerchief, as if afraid of catching something dirty. Soon after, the heavy wooden door of the tavern was suddenly pushed open, and two burly attendants came out cursing loudly. "Get lost, you bunch of stinky beggars." As they spoke, one kicked the nearest homeless person. The other, more civilized, waved his arms to chase them away while threatening with the owner's name. "Are you trying to die early by blocking the way? If you keep bothering us, when Old John comes out, he'll break your legs." The name Old John was like a loud whip, sharply striking the homeless crowd. The once silent group suddenly burst into chaos, screaming and scrambling to run away, disappearing in the blink of an eye. In Thorn City, the tavern owner John was almost a figure no one dared to provoke. He was quick-tempered, turning hostile faster than flipping a page, and was extremely skilled in fighting. Some said he used to be Duke Robert's personal guard, fighting barbarian hordes on the northern battlefield, a fierce ghost crawling out of a pile of corpses. Some people say he was once a retired mercenary leader who grew tired of risking his life every day. That's why he settled in Thorn City. Anyway, the name John itself suggests he is a fierce and ruthless person. Not long after the homeless man left the area, the sound of urgent horse hooves came from the city center. The hoofbeats grew louder, pounding on the frozen ground, making people feel uneasy. The residents living along the street were used to this. They simply pulled their blankets tighter and covered their faces, still sleeping peacefully. Of course, there were exceptions. A drunkard who had just gone to bed was disturbed by the noise. He rubbed his red eyes, sat up, and muttered quietly at the window. "Troublemaker, why don't you just fall off your horse?" His voice was very soft, so Richard, riding past on horseback, couldn't hear him. After receiving basic healing potions and 3 types of strength-enhancing medicines, he was no longer the helpless spoiled brat he once was. He skillfully controlled the black warhorse he had borrowed from the castle stables, rushing straight to the tavern's entrance, pulling the reins sharply. The horse neighed, rearing up its front legs, kicking up snow and mud, then landing heavily. Richard smoothly dismounted, handed the reins to the young servant at the door, and casually tossed 2 copper coins. "Take good care of my horse. If it loses even a single hair, I'll pull all your hair out." Without waiting for the servant's frightened expression, he pushed open the door and entered the tavern. Immediately, the strong smell of alcohol, sweat, and cheap tobacco hit him, making Richard instinctively cover his nose and mouth. He looked around and finally focused on 2 waiters dragging a heavy load. A sly smile appeared on his face as he loudly called out, "Hey, you 2 over there. Is my stuff ready?" Hearing the shout, the 2 waiters instinctively looked up. When they saw it was him, their faces immediately turned grim. They slowly carried the package over and bowed. "Master Richard, everything you asked for is here. May I ask, do you have any other instructions?" The words Master Richard caused the lively tavern to fall silent instantly. No one dared to look up or speak. This showed just how bad his reputation really was. Richard couldn't help but laugh at himself and said casually, "What are you afraid of?" "Young master, I don't eat people." After making this harmless joke, he stepped forward to untie the ropes and check the goods. Inside the package were neatly arranged white bread, strings of cured meat and smoked sausages, along with some other food. "Very good." Richard nodded with satisfaction, took out a few gold coins from his waist pouch, and swung his arm. The coins traced a beautiful arc and jingled as they fell into a clay jar on the bar. Hearing the crisp clink, John, the tavern owner who had been dozing nearby, suddenly opened his eyes. His cloudy eyes looked over, and he hummed indifferently, "Humph. So it's you, little guy." He reached into the jar, carefully pulled out 4 gold lion griffins, weighed them, then put them into his apron pocket and went back to sleep as if nothing had happened. Seeing this, Richard shrugged with a teasing tone and said, "Old John, if you had better service, less water in the wine, business would be 10 times better." Old John didn't lift his head and responded with a long, sarcastic tone. "Huh, mind your own business, you scoundrel." He changed his sleeping position, speaking with irony. "Worrying about my wine? You might as well think about whether the good place your father chose for you is enough to bury you." Few people in Thorn City dared to speak to Richard like that. Unfortunately, old John was one of them. Richard's smile froze on his face, then quickly changed to a reckless look, raising his at old John. Old John, just wait. When I inherit the title, the first thing I'll do is tear down this broken shop and make you a coffin from the best wood here. The tavern grew even quieter. Even the breathing sounds were deliberately suppressed. Everyone couldn't help but glance nervously toward the bar. John's body seemed to stiffen, and his eyes gradually turned bloodshot and red. Seeing the situation turning serious, Richard quickly grabbed his large package and ran out of the tavern, smoothly mounting his horse. Before leaving, he looked back at the tavern, still glowing with orange light, and shouted, "Goodbye, old John. Goodbye, Thorn City." Before he finished speaking, his black horse charged into the snowstorm. When he reached the gathering place on horseback, Toby and Bard looked at him with very expressive faces. If they didn't see it wrong, the young master's horse should be the Duke's favorite Uric purebred warhorse, worth over 1,000 gold coins. The Duke had gone to great lengths to get this horse from the king. Now, the Duke, actually, gave this horse to the young master. They exchanged glances, both surprised by what they saw in each other's eyes. Is this true fatherly love, or just a way to let the young master run away with the money? From afar, Richard saw 2 large wagons gathering. The wagons looked old, covered with raincloth, and rustled loudly in the cold wind. The women on the wagons held their children tightly, their faces pale from the cold, eyes full of worry. The elders sat silently, rubbing their hands, their breath quickly blown away by the wind. Celia, wrapped in an old cloak, stood quietly by the wagon, her face red from the cold, but her eyes calm. 3 horses, 10 people, 2 nearly falling apart wagons, and a pile of miscellaneous supplies. This was all Richard owned, so poor it made him want to laugh. He casually threw the package he brought from the tavern into the wagon, rubbed his frozen hands, and said, "Take these, eat sparingly. It's enough to get us to the next supply point." He deliberately raised his voice to sound confident. "Everyone stay strong. Our good days are still ahead." Only Toby and Baird managed weak smiles in response. The others looked unwilling, but they didn't dare say so. Richard didn't mind. He turned to look at Celia's red face, speaking softly. "It's cold outside. Get back on the wagon." Actually, he was freezing too, but in this environment, a leader's example was very important. Even if he was freezing, he had to hold on. When everyone was ready, Richard took a deep breath of the cold air, shook the reins, looked toward the snowy south, and loudly announced, "Let's go." Those 2 simple words decided the fate of everyone present. After leaving Thorn City, Richard truly felt how desolate and ruined the southern land was. This land was a true reflection of the word, barren, few people, wasteland everywhere, and the plants withering away. Looking out, all I see is endless wilderness and biting cold. Occasionally, a few withered, crooked trees appear, adding a touch of bleakness and sadness to the scene. On the way south, the last decent supply point is Iron Furnace City, over 300 miles away. It is the final mark of civilization on the edge of the wilderness. Beyond Iron Furnace City, we truly enter unknown territory. The wheels roll over a bumpy road almost buried in snow, making a dull squeaking sound that feels especially loud in the silent wilderness. Bard drives a cart at the front. Toby follows behind in another cart. They stand like 2 silent statues, guarding the small convoy. As for Richard, he can't stand the freezing wind, so he wraps himself tightly in a thick cloak and stays inside the wagon, leaving his warhorse to stand alone in the wind. At first, they sometimes saw a few other caravans struggling through the snow and cold. They would look at each other from afar, eyes full of caution and suspicion, then hurriedly pass by without even exchanging greetings.